The Democratic Socialists of America say they want socialism. But this couldn't be further from the truth. What they and their allies abroad really want is the eradication of Western civilization. And we have the receipts. Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. Last week we told you about the DSA candidates who swept Democratic primaries in New York and Washington, D.C. In that episode, which you should definitely check out, we talked about what kind of people make up the DSA. Basically, downwardly mobile, white-collar professionals who went to college, still wound up broke, and picked up a lot of crazy ideas along the way. Ideas like seizing private property, abolishing the police, abolishing America's borders, and abolishing prisons even for murderers. Insane, right? Well, you ain't seen nothing yet. In another episode, we covered the DSA conference in which they talked extensively about abolishing the family itself. Check it out.
The only real difference between marriage and prostitution is the price and the duration of the contract.
We can fight for family abolition, we can imagine family abolition because we have seen Black women do it, because we have seen these indigenous communities do it.
But to me it is the institution of marriage can only exist alongside the criminalization of sex workers.
An organization that hates families and loves prostitution. That sounds less like a political platform and more like the plot of Leaving Las Vegas. But that's just some of their domestic policies. The DSA and the far left have a whole foreign policy too. Chief among them is an almost single-minded obsession with Palestine and an opposition to any and all forms of so-called white settler colonialism. Now, what's strange about this is that you have DSA candidates devoting so much of their time to the Palestine issue, even when the position they're running for has little to no effect on America's conduct abroad. Take Abir Kawas, seen here waving what appears to be a headband of the designated terrorist group Hamas. She just won the Democratic primary for a seat in the New York State Senate. She recently said this.
The people in Queens, they want a free Palestine.
Wait, do they? I lived in Queens and I'm pretty sure the people there just want the 7 train to run on time. I mean, you're running for a seat in the New York State Senate, not the frickin' presidency. That's like asking your local school board how they plan on solving the national debt. And this isn't just a New York thing. The hyper-focus on Israel and Palestine has become endemic to the far left. California State Senator Scott Wiener, a gay Jewish Democrat, recently got chased out of a trans pride event, not for his lack of pride credentials, but for being, quote, a genocidal supporting center-right shill, which is to say, not being sufficiently pro-Palestine. Again, Scott Wiener is a state senator. He doesn't really control anything outside of California, let alone on the other side of the planet. Though someone who could have more impact on the Israel-Hamas conflict is Daria-Liza Chevalier. She's the DSA candidate who just won the Democratic primary for New York's 13th congressional district. It's been reported that she's a founding member of Columbia University Apartheid Divest, or QUAD. That's one of the groups that essentially shut down the Columbia University campus in 2024. According to Campus Reform, in a now deleted Instagram post, Quad said their intifada is an internationalist one and that they are Westerners fighting for the total eradication of Western civilization. Now that's the key here. This whole Palestine obsession isn't really about Palestine. And the far left's opposition to Israel isn't about Israel or anti-Semitism. It's an opposition to what they see as Western civilization. And by Western civilization, they really mean the United States. Like, nobody actually expects Hamas to turn Gaza into a workers' paradise. Nobody thinks the global intifada is going to stand up for trans rights. Underneath all the talk of socialism and liberation is what you would call third worldism. Your typical Brooklynite DSA leftist has almost nothing in common with your average Hamas soldier. Rather, the conflict is simply a means of focusing left-wing discontent. And beyond that, It's a tool for America's adversaries. As one political writer puts it, modern anti-Zionism, now the glue of the DSA left, was a Soviet tool. He notes that the DSA has been building ties with Cuba, the Chinese Communist Party, and even expressed pro-Russian sentiment, despite Russia being ostensibly right-wing. And that tracks. We've already covered the far left's ties to states like China many times on the show. For example, Neville Roy Singham is a China-based millionaire with extensive ties to the CCP. He and his wife, Jody Evans, a co-founder of Code Pink, have funded a network of left-wing activist organizations across the United States. Remember the No Kings protests? While the permit for its flagship march in St. Paul, Minnesota showed a Democratic advocacy organization as the coordinator, also participating was a network of radical socialist and communist organizations funded by Singham. And just yesterday, it was announced that Singham is being probed by the Department of Justice over potential crimes in his funding of leftist groups. The investigation is attempting to determine if Singham, the organizations he funded, or their leaders committed wire fraud, bank fraud, money laundering, or other financial crimes. But this network isn't just made for astroturfing protests. There's a whole media ecosystem to it as well. Hassan Piker, one of the biggest left-wing influencers in America, visited Cuba alongside Code Pink and Singham's wife, Jody Evans. It was a trip meant to provide aid to the island's failing communist regime. Now, they too are under federal investigation for sanctions violations. Piker also visited China and told his viewers exactly why he loves the Chinese system.
In my conscience, I have already become Chinese. You have abundant style consumption paired up with a centrally controlled economy, an economic system. You have 1950s Soviet era building blocks next to the Gucci store.
I mean, what do you even say to that? The self-described communists' favorite thing about China is the fact that they have Gucci stores and slum housing? The fighter for a classless society has nothing but praise for one of the most deeply unequal societies on earth. And for someone who's really concerned with the genocide apparently happening in Gaza, finds no issue with the CCP, a regime that is currently engaged in a genocide against Xinjiang's Muslims as we speak. I'm talking about a systematic campaign of mass detention, forced sterilization, family separation, and cultural erasure. Everything about these far-left influencers and billionaires and politicians is just so fake. These people aren't interested in building a classless post-racial society with gay rights or any of that. These are useful idiots who will go to bat for any group and any regime that opposes the U.S. Which brings us to the question, how did we even get here? Because this didn't start in a Brooklyn apartment. It started in Moscow. The history of the Israel-Palestine conflict is a perfect illustration. Early Zionism had real ideological overlap with socialism. The kibbutz movement was a living example of collective agricultural living. And Israel's founding generation was dominated by labor Zionists like the Mapai Party and its successors, who ran the country until 1977. This was not a natural enemy of the Soviet Union. So what changed? Well, Israel didn't become a Soviet satellite. When it became clear that Israel would align with the West, the Soviets needed a counterpiece on the board. So they supported the Palestine Liberation Organization. They backed Gamal Abdel Nasser's pan-Arab nationalism. They trained Palestinian militants and provided diplomatic cover at the United Nations. They turned anti-Zionism into an international cause, not because they cared about Palestinians, but because it was a useful instrument against an American ally. What got transmitted back to the Western left wasn't a genuine liberation ideology, it was a geopolitical instrument that got laundered through Western universities and activist networks during the Cold War. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, that movement came under new management. What I'm saying is the DSA and the broader American far left have been recruited, some knowingly, some not, into a foreign influence operation that has been running continuously since the late 1940s. The Soviet Union built the infrastructure. China inherited it. The Palestinians, the Cubans, these are just pawns in the larger game of great power politics. The DSA doesn't actually care about the working class. Code Pink doesn't care about Palestinians. Hassan Piker doesn't actually care about socialism. What all these people share isn't an ideology, but an enemy. And that enemy is the United States. China and its allies know this and are intent on using them. Socialism and liberation are the branding. Destabilizing America is the mission. And soon, that mission will find its place in America's cities and America's Congress.
'Cause the flag still stands for freedom, and they can't take that